In this week's chapter, we look at issues regarding vulnerability, dependency, and resistance. These are different states of being for clients that all of us are going to encounter at one time or another. I suppose that in the heart and soul of every social worker, at least in my heart and soul, there is a part of me that always wishes that I had a client who was ready to work with me, who was very desirous and cooperative, really wanted the change that I might be able to help them begin to find, and who really recognized my capacity to be of assistance and my willingness to be of support. But that just doesn't happen. If it does, it's very, very rare and few and far between. And should you ever run into a client like that, I really encourage you to get out your little diary and write about it, because you're not going to see that very often. And it will be helpful in more normal times for you to be able to read about it. The fact is that in the social work profession, oftentimes our clients come to us under circumstances that are less than ideal, and we're also dealing with clients who are having particular problems in the world around them, and so to have a motivated, capable client in front of you is something that is oftentimes a rarity. Well, with that in mind, we first start looking at issues about vulnerability. There are people who are characterized as more vulnerable than others, and in our society, and these includes groups such as those that belong to the poor or the elderly, the very young. That's children mostly. Members of most minority groups, the physically and mentally handicapped, and other such things as that. Within our society, the supports that are available to the rest of us to assist us in gaining access to the kinds of things we need to improve our circumstance and to live a healthy life, the access to those things are blocked to individuals in these groups, and so prejudice and discrimination really kind of keeps the doors closed to opportunity for the individuals in these groups, and this is a major factor in creating vulnerable individuals and dependency in clients. Now, when clients do experience vulnerability, there are certain kinds of ways that they can respond to that, and one of them is what we do. Hopefully, generally speaking, is that we mobilize our resources, both our personal ones as well as resources that are at our fingertips, to deal with and change the circumstances that create our vulnerability. So, for instance, if you're a young woman who must walk long distances at night, let's say from class to class or from the job to the bus station, or must live alone or something along those lines, there's a vulnerability there that can be dealt with through different kinds of things, like, for instance, taking self-help groups, and by putting in alarm systems in your home perhaps, and by carrying a can of mace or other kinds of things. And when I said self-help groups, I meant self-defense classes, those kinds of things. And so these are examples of individuals that motivate resources to help deal with vulnerability. For many clients, though, those kinds of things aren't available, whether it's financially, there's lack of awareness of the resources that are out there for them, or there may be a sort of a mindset that suggests that there's nothing they can do about their situation. And so this is one of the things we call learned helplessness, and so learned helplessness and dependency results in individuals who are vulnerable, really kind of requiring others and by extension society to help care for them. One other response is to strike out in fear and rage at those forces that they can't control, and that oftentimes creates other problems, of course, that really take our clients into whole other realms of need. But these are three different ways that we can cope with vulnerability in our lives. A social worker that goes into a situation like this needs to have the skills and knowledge to help the clients develop feelings of personal adequacy. That is, what kinds of resources are out there, and helping clients, using their skills to help clients recognize those resources and to begin to believe in themselves enough that they can stand on their own and take care of themselves this way. This is mobilizing mobilizing the client and to mobilize their own resources to challenge the destructive forces in their lives. There are certain tools that we need to have in working with vulnerable people, and this includes, first of all, a self-awareness. How do we feel about vulnerable people? Do we see them as someone who is incapable, or do we look again inside, deep inside, do we see them as perhaps less than ourselves because of their vulnerability? We all kind of carry things from our pasts. Sometimes we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and in particular, I think individuals who have done that, who have overcome obstacles, oftentimes will look down upon vulnerable people inside of themselves, as knowing that they really could do better if they only tried. When indeed that's not as simple as that. So being aware of what kinds of forces may be within us is one thing that we definitely need to get a grasp on before we work with populations like this. We need to know how this says the self, this really means the worker's self, impacts the client's life. That is, does the client see you as a helpful person, as a positive force in their life, or are you being pushed upon them, and do they see you as an intrusion? Those kinds of things. How does your presence help or impact the client? And that's another thing that's really something you need to know in working with other people. We need to have the ability to deal with the special problems of communication. A lot of times these come from individuals that, for instance, from other cultures and things like that, where there may be particular kinds of things we need to be aware of as we communicate with them. One of those things, it talks about understanding the social situation that contributes and perpetuates the problems. Among those kinds of things, of course, poverty, lack of education, lack of social supports, those things all are among that thing. But another thing is a cultural message that says you shouldn't accept help from others, and that getting help, particularly from persons associated with the institutions of society, which can't be trusted in many people's minds. So these are all things that, again, we need to be aware of. And another thing is it's not enough just to have a motivation to help, but we really have to have some data and knowledge about the client group and about their circumstances. We can't go in just meaning to do well. If we don't understand what is going on with the individual and their group, we're not going to be able to be of assistance. So know the situation. Not just have ideals, not just have an emotional desire to help things, but really have a knowledge of the situation, and including things like how we're going to assist our clients in working with the legislative process or the legal system, or how we go about creating change in the organizations that are impacting the client. These are very, very important things. We have to know how to help clients adapt to the status quo oftentimes if we can't change those things, and that's a lot of what our work is, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon your view, and that is to assist individuals in adjusting to the way the reality of their life is. But really, that's, as I think has been kind of a theme in this book, all along, is that's really not enough. We need to be able to do more, and so we want to help our clients also learn how to deal with their own environment in a more constructive way, and maybe help them figure out ways to make their environment healthier, as well as advocating for the clients in that way as well on a more macro level. Dependency is another state or condition that we run into with our clients, and the fact is that none of us are really totally independent, and independence, that rugged individualism, is one of those things that is one of those basic American ideals that we hold to dearly. This idea that if we really want to, we can stand on our own. We should stand on our own, and we shouldn't need help from others. These are sort of myths in our thinking about American values, I believe, and it often interferes in individuals feeling okay about accepting help from us. The truth is that we're all interdependent, and even those who believe that they've always stood on their own, if you look at it historically, haven't stood on their own, because at one point or another the government has intervened, or they've used government resources or the resources of the community in order to get where they are today. And so perhaps their independent functioning today is dependent upon and a result of their forebears or themselves earlier in their lives being more dependent on help from others. A healthy individual recognizes this interdependence that we experience in our lives and is comfortable with that. And so we will have a healthy blend of dependence and independence, all of us, including our clients, including the workers. And in a healthy system of interdependent parts, each part supplements and complements. That's complements with the E, which means completes, not makes the other person feel good with a compliment, but complements and supplements the other part in a give and take relationship. So sometimes we are able to help others and we are able to do for others, but sometimes we need others to do for us. And that's okay. That's a healthy situation, actually. But our society, our situation overemphasizes independence, and so this is something that our clients are always going to encounter as they are approaching us or being offered help by us. The other thing I think it's important for us to know is, where do we stand in this value? And it is a value that every American has woven into the fabric of his or her existence. I really don't believe that any of us can grow up American without believing on a certain level, perhaps deep inside somewhere in the fabric of our being, that we should be able to take care of ourselves, and that to ask for help is somehow demeaning or less than capable. And so when we have these values, if they're strong values, that's going to impact our capacity to help our clients as well. And so it's very, very important for us to be aware of that and to deal with those beliefs if we find them, so that we don't have attitudes that are negative towards our clients as we approach them. Sometimes these attitudes are obvious. A lot of times they're very underlying and very deeply seated, and it's important to, I think, first to acknowledge that they can be there before we're ever going to be able to find them. So with a dependent client, you're going to use your knowledge to create the social conditions that facilitates the fullest development of an individual's capacity for independence, and you'll work to use your practice methods to help to lessen the client's need to function at either extreme of this continuum. We certainly don't want our clients to go through their lives being so overwhelmingly dependent on others and on the system that they do nothing for themselves, or they're little able to do for themselves. But we also don't want a client that is so ruggedly individual that they never accept help from others and don't let others into their lives, because that is unhealthy for us as well. So it takes the planning and the action of not only the worker, because the worker isn't the person creating change, it's the client, right? So the collective planning and action of clients, workers, and the general public, this is the community, let's say the society around us, are all necessary to bring about social change. Can't do this by ourselves. These efforts can only be constructive if they use discipline and knowledgeable action that is based on reality, with a strategy to bring that change about. If social change, for instance, involves challenging an institution in society, say an organization or an individual who's a powerful person who blocks progress for whatever reason, if we throw ourselves at these institutions, at these individuals in an aggressive fashion that makes the individuals in charge of those organizations or those individuals feel very, very bad about themselves, if they feel attacked, the natural tendency will be for them to defend themselves. And when we're defending ourselves, we're not hearing and listening and to what's being given to us. We're defending ourselves primarily, and so our senses shut down and focus upon self-defense. When we assault individuals who are in charge of the institutions that are hurting our clients or hurting ourselves, we're really not going to get anywhere. We're not going to help the situation. We have to take a logical approach to these things. We have to be disciplined. We have to know what we're doing. We get armed with facts, and we challenge those individuals, those organizations, with respect, and approach them in a way that we would want to be approached if we needed to make some changes. That's an important thing to keep in mind. I've seen workers over the years who are very aggressive in their advocacy, and they really don't achieve a whole lot doing that. And it's an important thing to keep in mind. We don't live in a television show where aggressive persons get what they want inside of the hour or whatever that the show's on. This is reality, and we have to be able to bring ourselves across in a way that others involved in a social change will see the need that we already perceive. When we work with our clients, we want to be able to determine one of the things is, we have to determine where the client is on this dependent-independent continuum. And so some questions that we can ask ourselves is, what is the client's capacity for self-determination? Because this is something, self-determination is something that we really believe in as a profession, as professionals. The client's right to make their own decisions, and yet do they have the capacity to make good decisions for themselves? Or in the dependence and independence continuum, you can see how this could be a very important factor. Can they make good decisions for themselves? How well can they function in an interdependent relationship? Can they stand their own and give to others as well as receive from others? What does the client think or feel about life that may cause them to be overly dependent, if indeed that's why we're involved with them? And remember our attitude, which I think is well put here. It is we will work with you to solve your problems. It's not we're going to solve your problems for you. That's an important thing to keep in mind. We are an agent of change, but the change occurs with the client. Another thing to keep in mind as well is that sometimes what appears to be dependency when we deal with our clients is something very different and really kind of comes out of a place of feeling paralyzed by the lack of opportunity or lack of awareness of opportunity to be anything different or do anything different. And this is something that I think is important to keep in mind, that dependency isn't necessarily just a static state that where nobody wants to give for themselves. It may be that people are just so overwhelmed by their circumstance that they can't see a way that they can possibly do that. And so these are things that in your assessment that I think need to be kept in mind and may give you some clues as to what kind of barriers to independence or interdependence the client has, what kind of barriers you need to address in trying to help them to a healthier position on that continuum. Finally, resistance is the third area that the authors write about in this particular book, and it's something that you'll be very familiar with in social work. As I've mentioned in previous lectures, most of the work you're going to find yourself doing over the years is going to be with involuntary clients. That is just the nature of our work. That's how they become social work clients in many respects. And so resistance is sort of one of those things that is going to happen. But even setting aside the status of involuntary client, we have a resistance that's kind of built into change. We all have, if you think back to systems theory and you think about ourselves as sort of a system, I suppose, of thought and beliefs and attitudes and interactions with others. When change is introduced into our own personal system, it causes an imbalance and lack of comfort and this kinds of things. And so we all resist change in one way or another. Sometimes even when we want the change, when we seek the change, it's still threatening enough, the unknowns associated with it, that we may actually kind of act in spite of ourselves to undermine the change. And resistance is the way we do this. And now it can be through active hostility. It can be through passive apathy, just not really taking the steps that need to be taken, or just being openly hostile and resistant. Actually, resistance, I think they say somewhere in this chapter that when resistance is expressed to you, it's easier to deal with because you've got something in front of you. It is sort of that passivity that sometimes is very difficult to work with because it's pretty easily deniable. But we adapt to the demands of living by developing our ways of behaving and thinking that meets our needs, and we're comfortable with the status quo, and so having that challenged, which change does, is very uncomfortable for us. And then beyond that, then of course there is the involuntary client status that so many of our individuals have that may explain resistance. Past negative experiences with helpers, people who have made promises they didn't keep, people who maybe came and went really quickly, and the client formed a sort of a dependency in a relationship that was felt to be cheated when that person left. And incidentally, going back to dependency, I will say that there is a philosophy sometimes that says that at different points in the worker-client relationship, sort of fostering dependency among involuntary clients can be a good thing, because if you can get the client to the point where they see you as somebody who can help them, and you provide some assistance to them, they may come a point where they become less of a resistant client, and begin to experience your role in their lives more positively. So, it also deals with that past negative experience thing. Now, this is not something that you want to have going on for forever or for a long period of time, but during certain periods, fostering dependency can be a positive technique in engaging involuntary clients, and helping them to rethink what our role is in their lives. Some people have no capacity or limited capacity or a damaged capacity for healthy relationships that intrudes and creates resistance with them. Some people, it seems probably from early experience, are just kind of almost naturally resistant to authority of any kind, and no matter what the reason is, no matter how careful it's presented, you run into that sometimes when you work with adolescents, for a period of time. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, there are cultural barriers sometimes that just really prevent people from feeling as though it's okay to be receiving help from workers and from government agents or from private organizations, and from anybody for that matter. And so you may encounter resistance to the client in those situations as well. And so I think the moral of the story here is that if you're feeling resistance and experiencing resistance with your clients, one of the things you want to do is kind of assess what the possible reasons may be for that, because again, it tells you where to intervene, what you might be able to do in order to help overcome that resistance. But keep in mind, these are kind of natural reactions. They're not focused so much on you as an individual. The causes of them can be identified and addressed. And so in your work with people, as you encounter this resistance, don't interpret it personally. Remain non-defensive. Acknowledge the mistakes that other programs or persons have made in the past, and try to get the client focused upon the here and now with you in this working relationship, and go from there. So the extremes of these particular kinds of problems really require that you be very creative and use all the resources at your fingertips in working with clients. And sometimes, probably all the time, they really need to be tailored to meet the individual situation and the individual client. And so we have to be flexible. We want to be imaginative. We want to have the capacity to identify priorities. Perhaps we have to set aside a focus on the particular problem we engaged in first, to identify first, or to work with the barriers that are existing that prevent the worker, or the client rather, from engaging and working on that particular problem: resistance, dependency, those kinds of things. And so sometimes we have to be willing to change our priorities in our work. Remember, as Maslow and many other people have taught us, basic human needs have to be dealt with first. And so, once again, another good way to get your foot in the door with a resistant client, I think, is to look and assess any particular basic needs they have that aren't being met, and try to arrange for resources to get them met. You establish yourself as a helper this way, and perhaps as a positive force in your client's life, and it is just you that can pull these resources together. We used to call them natural helping networks. That is the significant others in people's lives, perhaps groups that they belong to, or volunteers in their neighborhood or whatever. Engage other people in providing for these clients, and giving the clients the kind of sources they need, or the support they need, because in the long run they're going to be there after you have left. And so utilizing the natural helping networks is a very effective way of providing social services to clients. So in our society, just a closing thought, people will feel concern for vulnerable people who need special supports, but there's also often an underlying resentment towards those individuals. And so this is just something that's important to keep in mind. It's one of the reasons why a lot of times there is mixed feelings about the provision of social services and social work services in our society today. And so remember, again, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these are a part of our own our own fabric of beliefs and feelings and attitudes. And so we should always be clear about our feelings and attitudes in these areas and deal with anything we need to deal with there so that we can be most effective in helping clients in situations such as this. So, a short chapter, and I hope that you find some useful information in this particular presentation. These are areas that you'll need to be familiar with and adept at dealing with during your social work career. So that's all for this week.